sin is not something that comes easy, but the purpose of Lent is to look at the subject of sin in our life, preparing ourselves for the upcoming events at Easter. And we want to clear these things out of our hearts and our lives. And as I did, there was a subject that just kept me always the 800-pound gorilla. You know, the one that you just it's not there if I don't look. It's like that person that goes through the intersection and comes well. It's like if I don't look, I won't realize it. And so I finally said enough's enough. So next week we'll be looking at how do I know that something is a sin. But today I want to look at the subject of secret sin. And it's not, this is not something that good Easter, not preaching at anyone. I see myself first and foremost whenever a message begins to itself. And I mean that as God. Going back to Valentine's Day, you know, I thought I was really slick. I mean, I thought I was really smooth. Michelle and I had agreed that we weren't going to do anything over the top for each other. And of course, I readily said I would do that. Full plan, really not. And I had gotten Michelle a gift. And I thought I was roasting. You know, I don't know why I thought I'd be nice to him. But I thought that I could get away and she wouldn't realize that I had, you know, spent money from our accounts and things like that. And Valentine's came and she was very, very surprised and enjoyed the gift. I think she's wearing it today. It's a necklace. But on February 13th, I was at the gym and I was telling everybody about the surprise. And I was telling him how slick I was. And he looked at me, very straight face, pulled the rug out and said, you know, women always find out. If nothing else, she had to have seen the credit card notification when it came in, right? And I was like crestfallen, and but he was right. He was absolutely right. My only hope of a surprise was that she would just come up and let it go by, and that she had ignored any kind of notifications coming in because she knows them. But one thing I learned sure is next time, Ashley, you know, because they always find out. But our reading today, we have a very sordid detail of an incident in the life of David. And on one hand, I want to apologize for the rather lengthy reading. But if you haven't ever read this, it's something you really ought to equate yourself with because there's so many aspects at play here. One, we look at people like King David and think he's, you know, on this kind of pedestal. Let me tell you what, he was a man, everybody else. How do we always say it depends on one thing at a time? He was just as normal every day as the rest of us. So our reading comes from 2 Samuel chapter 12. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 through 10. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 to 10. The Lord sent Nathan to David. Nathan was the prophet at the time. When he came to see him, he said, there are two men in a certain village, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little lamb that he had bought and he had raised, and he grew up with him, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, and the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to see him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, The man who did this must die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are that. This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all of Israel and Judah. And if all of this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why do you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and you took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we pray that you would open the word, Father, that use your servant this morning to bring your word just the way you have meant it. Father, I thank you that your spirit is here today. Anoint your servant that way. Bring your word in your name. David thought he could get away with anything. Now, I think it's kind of a Reader's Digest version of that story. But Uriah the Hittite was one of his chief warriors, and he was a fiercely loyal man to David. David actually said, he goes, oh, I'm going to give you a promotion here. Hold the flag, don't front the back, hoping to get him killed. Because the woman he's talking about was, I'm sorry, Bathsheba. Thank you. Was Bathsheba. And David, his house, his castle, was on the top of the hill. He could look down what's called the Old City. And he could literally look and watch through for several nights. And lust formed in the heart as it enters God. And he entered little by little by little into this. But in truth, as I said, David is just a flesh and blood man like any other man on earth. But you got to ask yourself, how could this happen? And I kind of tipped my hands in. Sin is like a seed. That's why the Pharisees called it leaven. It doesn't take much yeast to make bread rise, right? But it's like, a seed in our heart. And, well, if we decide we want to nurture it, it's going to grow. And the fruit that comes from it is going to determine where things go really wrong. But make no mistake, what happens in the dark is going to be seen. And we're going to look into that today. But this also put me in mind of the woman caught in adultery. And that comes from John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. First off, that situation was an attempt to trap Jesus. And it was a no-win situation there. If he said, don't stone the woman, then he was going against the law. And if he said, go ahead and stone them, he was calling for a violation of the Jewish law that said the Israelites cannot carry out their own punishment. So it was an attempt simply to trap him. But if Jesus had said to them, stone her, he'd have been done either way. But Jesus' actions that day were some of the most amazing to me. But there's a lot of speculation. It says that when they asked him this, Jesus knelt down and started writing in the dirt. And there's speculation. There's no way that we can know exactly what he was writing. There is no indication at all. Some think, and I don't really agree with this, that it says that the woman was caught in the act of adultery. They may have literally yanked her out because her male counterpart wasn't there. They may have literally yanked her out of the field. She may have been in a state of distress, and Christ chose not to look upon her. Certainly that's practical enough that it may have been the case. But I've always felt that what he did, based on his answer, and the rest of the circumstance, is that he was writing a list of sins. sins that he knew were in the heart of those that were there with stones in their hands. And one by one, I think people looked at that list and they saw themselves. Because Christ said, the world is without sin. Each one came to see themselves openly revered, openly on display. Yet, there's no way really knowing it's not what he was doing. The lesson here is that if Jesus was writing that list of sins, then those who would write, then like David, God is showing that any sin, no matter great or small, never goes unnoticed. In this day and age of computers and we have all this information streaming into our house through handhelds, through television sets. We have all this information so often, we have the false feeling of being anonymous to the world and what we're doing, and especially when someone is online and things that they do on their computer. You are exchanging information with the world, whether you like it or not. And there is no hiding. Just because the lights are out in the room doesn't mean you're in the dark. And Jesus' understanding of the law is a devastating blow against the lie, and that image is everything. That image is everything. We put clean suit on some, and we think that makes them respectful. It does not. Jesus said it's not what goes into a man that defines him. What I mean to say is whatever we take in through our eyes and our ears, if we order it like we seed in our heart, then it grows to become sin. You can hardly turn on a children's television series anymore without being confronted with what I know to be sin in my heart of hearts. It is there. It serves no plot purpose, but it is there. Michelle and I were watching, probably mostly me, was watching the show about fairy magic in some high school kind of setting. Don't judge. I liked it. I liked it mostly, but you could tell that there were situations contrived that had no purpose on the plot. None whatsoever, but they wanted to force an agenda, a worldly agenda out and say, hey, look, we're cool. See, we have it in our show. And I'm like, there's no plot purpose here. So we can't do that. But what we allow to go in and grow in our hearts is going to dictate what becomes sin in our life. What becomes sin in our life. There are two words that describe what happens, and that is arrogance and hypocrisy. Arrogance and hypocrisy. The Lord called Peter that sin bottled on the inside, concealed from everyone else's view, carries the very same guilt that openly reveals itself in the worst forms of ungodly behavior. I want to say that the Lord taught Peter that sin, bottled and hidden away on the inside, concealed from everyone else's view, carries the very same guilt as the sin that is openly reveals itself in the worst forms of ungodly behavior. This woman was caught in the very act of adultery. As I've always felt, probably yanked literally from the bedroom. Her sin is no greater than what David did in private. Now, we've seen how it was revealed and how it all came out. But up until that point, it was just hidden away. Just that Uriah This brave guy was killed in battle. For example, those who hate others are guilty as those who act out on their hatred. Let's think about what God said. If I hold in my heart hatred towards all the things that we know to be wrong in this world, it is okay to keep the thing, not the individual caught up in the thing. In other words, I have very strong feelings when it comes to the whole LGBTQ agenda that is thrust every single day. Probably I'm still sleeping. Uh, but it's thrust at us every single day. And I'm very confused, but I understand that people are individuals. Christ died, and they need the love of Christ. And in receiving the love of Christ, they will then simply want to become pleasing children. And those things will go away. That's how it was in my life. That's how it is in everyone's lives. So it sounds cliche to say we hate sin, not the sinner, but it is nonetheless true. It is absolutely the truth. So Christians are not to think of secret sins as somehow less serious and more respectable than the sins everyone sees. I want us to look at 3 reasons that secret sin is especially abhorrent to God. Reason 1, because God sees. God sees. Scripture tells us God sees as no man sees, for he looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. That comes from 1 Samuel 16. And that comes from a time when Israel wanted a king so that they could be like all the other nations. Up until that time, they had judges. They wanted a king like everybody else, who could look like everybody else. So God had them look through, and they came across the very first king of Israel, and he was head and shoulders taller than everybody else. Looked very soft, looked very kingly, and said, God, the outfit. He looks at. This is true how we perceive people in our attitudes towards sin. No sin, not even a whispered curse or a fleeting evil thought, is ever going to be hidden from God's view. It simply is impossible. In fact, if we realize that God Himself is the only audience for such secret sins, we might less be inclined to write them off so lightly. In our home, Michelle and I have a sign. It's right in our kitchen. It says, Christ is the center of our home. He is the guest at each meal and the unseen listener to every single conversation. And if that's not good enough to remind me of what I do, I have a monk, Kristen, that says, God sees all. Still use that every single day. Every single day. Oh, and there's a picture of a little boy Susan. Man, that is me in the nutshell. The Bible declares that God will one day judge the secrets of every single sin. Romans 2:16. One of my favorites comes from Ecclesiastes, verse 12 and 14. He, speaking of God, will bring every act of judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or it is evil. Not only that, secret sins will never, ever remain secret. The Lord will bring to light the things that are hidden in the darkness. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5. And Jesus Himself said, there is nothing covered up that will not be revealed, and that will not be known, according to whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, that what you have whispered in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. Luke chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. It's David's folly all over again, isn't it? Those who wanted to trap him as well. Those who think they can evade shame by sitting in secret will discover one day that open disclosure of secret before the very throne of God is the worst shame we think we do in private, and we're just filling a garbage can that one day we don't use. Imagine I'm not able to see this happen in lives. People to will sin will eventually, when their sin is uh, shown, we realize friend very early work day life. His name is Barry. Barry was a great guy. He was always there for everybody. Always had a quick joke, and was just everybody's good time buddy. One day there was an escape, and nobody understood how this happened. Well, the investigation revealed my friend had traded the key to the back door of the jail for the promised buried treasure. I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. There was a guy in the jail that was a real second story kind of cat burglar. And the rumor was that he had buried animals. And he promised Barry, who was in need of money, well, we didn't know he had a gambling problem. And that he would, if he would get him that key to get out the back door, he would tell him you can't, you cannot make it. The depth of that stupidity. It is a shame that often in my former line of work, you get some people that there's really not a lot of difference between who they're watching and who they really are in the dark. I knew another one, a lieutenant who property from the evidence locker kept coming up missing, specifically marijuana. And here tell, he was the boyfriend of one of the girls in the TV, and he was stealing from the evidence locker. Eventually, it comes out. Eventually, it all comes out. It is foolish to think that we can minimize our sin by keeping it secret. It is doubly foolish to tell ourselves that we are better than others because we sin in a different way, or especially that we sin in pride and not sin. All sin is an assault against the holy God, whether it is done in public or it is done in secret. All sin, a little white lie, homicide, whatever it might be, any one of the millions of sins that are out there, it doesn't matter. It's all abhorrent to God. And God, who beholds even the innermost secrets of our heart, sees our sin clearly no matter how well we think we have. We convinced ourselves that it is acceptable to us to be taking part. The second reason secret sin is so abhorrent to God is because sin in the mind is a fruit of the same moral defect that produces the deed. Where I said, we let a seed grow in our community. I should tell you how many times I've been friendly with this and glance at the picture. If anybody does any time on Facebook, it's only an avenue of ministry for me. But you get these come up and you're like, yeah, something ain't right here. You go to look and you realize it is some person, probably from another country, who is just trying to catfish somebody or trying to get involved in pictures that they wouldn't want to set. And immediately my eyes go to the friend. God, they go in my You would be surprised how many times you find yourself it gets. Sometimes what you're doing in secret, when it comes out, is actually good. To me, I said it on Facebook for 15 years now, to publish the daily devotionals. I hope that you all have seen from time to time. And that's been going on for about 15 years now. But I was at the jail one day and I got called to the deputy warden of security's office and they closed the door and he's on security space. And when I said, now, what you do in private always becomes public. And there's really, in the jail, very small place, everybody knows everything, so don't think you're slick. So he sits me down, he says, I'm a little concerned. It came up that you were friends with an inmate who's now in work release on Facebook. I said, who's? And he said, yes. They receive my daily devotions. They go on their Facebook page. Oh, well, we really have policies against that. Now, anybody that knows me, that knows when I go, I'm a little confused. I am not confused. I am completely crystal clear about the words that are coming out of my mouth. He said, I'm a little confused at it. It's okay to use a work release inmate to put roofs on your rental properties. Yeah. It's okay to have a child with an inmate and someone else does the same shit. But I can't minister to their needs. So I'm a little confused by that. It's kind of a mixed signal thing. And he goes, well, I just wanted to check and make sure that you knew that good to go. You know, that was the end of that conversation. Real quick. Yeah, he's actually using inmates to put roofs on his commercial properties. It's true. But it is the same fruit of moral effect. We want to think that nobody knows about this, so that I can hide it. But it always comes out. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was pointing out that anger arises from the same moral defect that leads to murder. The one who lusts suffers from the same character flaw as a person who is involved in adultery. I've said so many times that adultery occurs in the human heart long before it does in a cozy dark place. It just simply does. And again, adultery doesn't always concern anything that we espouse, anything we espouse in a higher position. Furthermore, those who engage in thought sins are guilty of violating the same moral precepts as those who commit acts of murder and adultery. As I started out by saying, I got into this study and I began to realize and see myself. Where does my mind wander to when I see, and I have said this, Michelle will testify to this, those that know me best have heard me say this. Oh man, vengeance is mine, said the Lord, I will repay. He just wants them to be this instrument. Anybody ever thought that? Yeah, I'm saying it right here now. I've said it out. I've said it out loud. Now, if I think that I am ready to be the instrument of God's vengeance, you better think more. Pretty good. Because you're not. The sheer thought of putting the thought tells me I'm not. So I see myself in this. See myself every day. In other words, secret sins of the heart are morally tantamount, being the same thing, to the worst kinds of thieves, even if they are the sins of a lesser degree. A lesser person has no right to feel superior over a person who is caught in the physical act of adultery. In fact, when we indulge in lust is proof of their capability to perform any immoral act, as my friend did, left to theft. The fact that someone hates their brothers shows that they have murder lurking in their heart. We're getting a little late here today, and I apologize. The third reason secret sin is so important to God is because hidden sin usually involves a compounding sin that of hypocrisy. That of hypocrisy. Those who sin secretly actually intensify their guilt because they add the sin of hypocrisy to the offense. Now we're coming up on annual conference. And I said, as I look at some of those people that send me requests, because Facebook hooks everybody up according to algorithms, you have friends in common, maybe you'd be interested in the same thing. So I look and I see, we go to conference. Who do I see? Those people that you see on this person's site. I say, hey, I got a weird friend request the other day. I noticed your friends with it's dropping out to a little. Half a step puts me never God. But I have noticed that their tendency to continuing to be friends with those people diminishes greatly. Diminishes greatly. Hypocrisy is a grave sin in its own right. It also produces especially debilitating kinds of guilt because of the definition of hypocrisy entails the concealing of it. You've met people that are just ate up because you know that they are holding something in, they are holding something back, they are involved. Maybe I've had friends who were indulged in alcohol, they have been bit by that bug, and you know they're trying to keep the world in order, things that are getting spiraled out of control, and you can see it very well because they're trying to live one thing that they ate up. Because sin by very nature will continue until it consumes you. The only remedy for any kind of sin involves uncovering it, opening up the sword, getting it out through sincere confession. It's not easy when others have been offended and are unaware. Again, to say we have a true world, and it's so easy to think you are in private while one looks at and other issues. Marriage, sin, trying to conceal it's worse. Then, then hypocrisy is compounded again by betrayal. Because when we look at any object with lust in our hearts, we have given it a higher place in our marriage than our marriage itself. That's why Jesus referred to hypocrisy and sin as the leaven of the Pharisees we see in Luke 12. It works its way through. Hypocrisy also works directly against the conscience. And there is no way to be hypocritical without searing your conscience. Anybody ever notice that? We call that desensitized, right? We watch horror movies and we watch them long enough, often enough. You watch the right kinds of ones. You can be completely desensitized to the sight of blood and gore. It happens. We have to watch. Again, what goes in the eye, what goes in the ear, because it's going to enter the heart. And out of the abundance of heart, mouth flows. So if I'm filling it with garbage, what's going to come? If I'm filling it with good things, what's going to come? Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks within himself, so he is. The secret lives filled with distance. What you do, no one else would know the difference, is going to demonstrate what your character is. There is no secret. But the day, you know, whether it's these things, these things, but begun. The only place there's no substitution in any life for clean heart and clean hands. And the only way that we can get let get the yeast out. It was the symbol of Fastnacht Day, getting rid of the yeast in the house, getting rid of the leaven, the feast of unleavened bread. It was all tight and shabby. There's only one way, and it's positive confession. Create in me a clean heart. Renew my spirit. Cast me not away from your presence. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. Though your sins be as scarlet, I can sin. Positive confession. All of us are guilty of secrets, whether we things that we just don't want to tell our family because we don't want to worry about. They begin to believe us. Jesus said, "Take it. Give it. Sit down. We 60 years. Nothing was done. Nothing was done. Pharisees, their garments appeared. It's really the way to be sin comes first. Today, we look to a mirror. Word, allow it to disclose and correct the real thoughts and motives of all our hearts. Comes from James chapter 1, verses 21 through 25, where it tells us, therefore, get rid of all the moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which will save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at it, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks at like. But whoever looks intensely into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it is not forgetting what he has seen or heard, but what he is doing. They will be blessed. They will be blessed. No substitution. Clean heart. No. Pray that is your prayer this Lenten season to remove the leaven. It's so hard to talk about things that we like to smile. We like to say everything's fine. We wrestle against so many things. Father, help us to give